What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's going on with the economic calendar moving forward, talk about other factors out there, and what you should be watching for as time goes on the charts. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY in uninvested cash. The offer ends at the end of March. Anyways, let's talk about the markets. So today is President's Day, so the stock market is closed for the day. Also, the bonds market is closed. And for now, the market is in a very, very critical place. We're going to be resuming market trading in normal market hours tomorrow, so just keep that in mind. The question is, what's going to happen from this point? SPY closed at 0.00%, and we saw the QQQ a little bit in the green, but we're at some very, very tough resistance, so I'll give you guys my assessment on the charts in just a couple of minutes. Just know this, as far as the market's been going, we're seeing some tickers that are showing a lot of strength, such as like Nvidia, Apple, Meta, and many others out there. Some big tech stocks are a little bit weaker, such as like Amazon, Google, not to mention Microsoft. And then we have Tesla, which is trying to break out right now, but it's a little bit flat. So the majority of stocks are more flat, very, very mixed market, with some big tech stocks leading the way up. What's good for lots of the Nvidia investors out there is the fact that they're getting a nice buy rating from Morgan Stanley. They're saying to buy Nvidia ahead of earnings, which is a very, very good piece of news. Nvidia has its earnings on February 26th. I think that's going to be a very, very big market moving event. So get ready for that, guys. It's going to be key for how things end up continuing to move. Now, going back to the way the market's been moving for the last couple of days, we didn't have much today. We just had a couple of Fed speakers, but nothing too significant, at least so far. We had Donald Trump announcing his reciprocal tariffs on Thursday, right? That was Thursday afternoon. And what he said was very, very important. So just to give you guys a little bit more information about this, we haven't gotten another major update since, but he did tell us that he's planning on starting these reciprocal tariffs, and the US is going to be charging other countries the same thing they charge us. So for example, if India is charging the US, just for example, 20% for particular goods, right, the US is going to charge them back that much if they want to import products as well. So the US is going to charge India 20% if they charge us that much. And if India does not want that to happen, they could be incentivized to decrease their tariffs to like 15 or 10%, just for an example, right? He also announced there's going to be more tariffs coming on cars, on pharmaceuticals, not to mention semiconductors. That's going to be very impactful for some companies like Nvidia, but there's no confirmation yet about the exact extents. He just barely mentioned that, and that's why some stocks are still holding up despite that. Also, guys, I did mention to you all that we got hot inflationary data, and there's all this fear right now. There's all these people who were saying the market was going to dump. There's lots of fear that we had, high inflationary numbers, tariffs were coming, and instead of giving us a dump, the market started this nice pump. It broke past some key resistance, so there's a good chance it's going to try to continue this at least as time goes on. So I'll talk more about that in just a minute. I just want to mention a couple more things. So going into tomorrow, it's going to be Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. At 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the New York Empire State Manufacturing Index, which is quite minor. Then we have Dowley and Barr giving speeches from the Fed. Besides that, there's nothing else that's too crazy that's going to be coming out. The Fear and Greed Index is currently at fear, very close to neutral, so we'll see how well the market does here. There is still a lot of potential for upside looking at this gauge. We're not even in greed territory yet, so that gives the market more of an edge. Momentum is also neutral, and other factors still remain decent, like the put to call option ratio is at greed right now. We started to see a lot of people who are buying puts. So there's lots of put buying that happened, which is what fueled the market to rally. Now we're starting to see this go down just a little bit, so we'll see what this leads to. And volatility for the VIX is still dumping as it's starting to show some signs of a downtrend. That tends to be bullish for the markets. Last thing, this is what the earnings calendar looks like. Okay, we're about a week away from Nvidia's earnings. I would say 9 days to be more precise. We have some Chinese tickers announcing their earnings. We have OXY and a couple of others. Then on Wednesday, we have Etsy, Wix, Carvana, and others like that. On Thursday, we have Alibaba and Walmart, and then Rivian. And then finally on Friday, we have minor earnings. But I think Thursday is going to be the biggest day with Alibaba and Walmart. So with that being said, what do I think is going to pan out from this point on? What is my prediction for the markets? It's very simple. So when you look at SPY, every time we've hit 608 to 610 historically, we did reject. We made a new all-time high, I believe, on Friday, but then the market was not able to hold above that. We saw a chop day as a result of the options chain. Now, if SPY could hold above the 610s and close above that at the very least, there's a very, very good chance that we could be looking for 612 and then 615 as our potential targets, right? That's going to be the upside bullish target. If we look down on SPY, we have 608 as the main support. If we lose that, we're going to be looking for a dip back down closer to 605. So we could go either way, in my personal opinion, depending on the levels we are looking at. But typically, as we're at a very, very tough resistance, it makes more sense for us to actually see a small dip before the market attempts another big breakout. Because what typically happens when you break out of resistance like this is you get a little test before we finally see the move back up. Sometimes that happens. I think there's a good chance it might happen here because we're starting to show signs that we might turn down a little bit. So I think, and this is what my prediction is, it depends on which way we break, by the way. So make sure you're ready to watch your levels. We might make a move like this where we actually dip a little bit. We test like, 605 or so. I wouldn't be surprised if we touch 605 to 607. Small dip just by a couple of points. And then we continue to rally as the week progresses after FOMC minutes and such to about that 615 plus area. A move like this would be very, very healthy. And that's what I'm starting to anticipate now, looking at our 4-hour time frame. But just to be safe, sometimes they do some trickery moves where we barely get much of a dip and we just start pushing straight up past like 610. As long as we're above 610, we favor 615. And if we lose 608, we're looking for a dump back down. I am not favoring that. I think the most likely move is we kind of dip a bit before we try to bounce. And I think that this is very, very likely. Once we get a retest of our EMAs and we see buyers defend us to get back to our next bullish target based off our fib extension tools. So the fib extension tool, which suggests that if we break past the all-time high and we close above it, we're looking for like 615, 616 as our next target. I think there's a good chance we try to get right back up there. So could we see a small dip? Sure, a small dip back down to these supports at the 20 EMA would be very healthy before it tries to balance and break out a lot higher is the most likely possibility. But if we lose 602, we're bearish. And if we break past the all-time high, we're more bullish. You can see the charts favoring upside, maybe a small dip first before it tries to break out higher as the most likely move. On the QQQ, same thing. It looks very bullish. Now, we haven't made it to the all-time high. Excuse me. We almost made it. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up breaking it eventually. So we look very strong on the 4-hour time frame. Nvidia pumping is also going to fuel this, especially as there's a lot of buyers stepping in. The daily on the QQQ is looking bullish. We might see a small dip, a small little pullback to like 535 could happen before it tries to break out here. This could still be resembling like a cup and handle, and the inverse head and shoulders also has potential, especially when you look at like NQ and what other futures are doing. So I anticipate that we might see a small pullback, small little dip to fill this imbalance, a little dip to like 535 or so. Then if we break 538, we're looking for an attempt to get into like the 540s very, very nicely, such as like 542 or above. If we lose 535, we're going to be at risk of dipping to 533 or below. We might touch 535, but I anticipate that there's going to be a big bounce and a push to the 540s as the most likely possibility. So I anticipate some upside. So watch that very, very closely. For the Russell 2000, we are kind of stuck here. We're getting rejected off resistance at 229. We have the support right here in the low 220s. We're kind of going back and forth. Now, what is good about this chart is when you zoom out of the Russell 2000, we have a very clear left shoulder ahead and then a right shoulder right here. So if you break this 230 resistance, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to about 235 or so. And if we lose 220, we're looking for a dip. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a move like this where we have a wick that formed at least from Friday. So it's going to likely dip a little bit before it continues to consolidate. And then as months progress, we will eventually try to see a move like this. That's very, very possible for this. But for now, for the short term, okay, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. This might be dipping just a little bit back down to about 224.76 where the support is and all the way back down to this imbalance. I think there's going to be a small dip here with this wick forming. So that's very likely. We get a small dip like this before it tries to bounce again. So look for a move just like this for a retest of 224.76 or so. For ES, notice that we're starting to turn a little bit on the MACD. I noticed that we have a bullish structure. We're trying to break structure here. So ES is looking very promising. So for example, we had this flag that was forming essentially. Then we got to break through it. We've had another flag, and now we're trying to break through it all over again, right? So this is possibly a breakout as long as we maintain structure above this flag, above this upper resistance, which is now going to become support. As long as we're above this, we're favoring the upwards direction. We have 61, 68 as the main potential target, but what might happen first is a small dip. Might get a small dip first before we see another big bounce. And the reason for this is because we're starting to see signs of a breakout. So it would be very healthy if we dipped to about the 6125 to 6100 area between these EMAs. And then we could, after that, start pushing towards the all-time high, if not above that. And this would really help SPY push even higher. But I think this is the most likely possibility. If we lose 6,000 flat, I will turn a little bit more bearish. If we break the all-time high, we're a lot more bullish. I anticipate it's going to be a little bit of both. We see a small dip, but we don't lose support. We get a rebound after that is the most likely move for now. So watch that very, very closely. NQ has the same thing going on. So notice that we haven't made the full measured move despite the inverse head and shoulders on here. This is our left shoulder. This is the head and this is the right shoulder. So I think we could be going for 22,400, but we might pull back just a little bit first. If you look at the PPO right here, it would be very healthy if we do a small dip like this to about the 21,150 area first. And then we eventually consolidate and start breaking out higher for the all-time high all over again. So a move like this would be very, very healthy. A small dip first before it tries to bounce higher. I anticipate that to be the most likely possibility. Bitcoin's looking so-so. It's not really getting much of a breakout compared to before. We have support at 95,000, resistance at 98,000, going back and forth between these levels. We'll see if we break resistance at 96,000, so give it some time as we're stuck between these levels. So just be very, very keen. For Nvidia, we look very bullish. We're making higher highs and higher lows. We're trying to break through this resistance, and we've been holding it very nicely. So I anticipate a move like this. If Nvidia does get a small dip, it may continue to push. I do think we're eventually going to get back up towards like this 150 area before earnings like this. So I anticipate a nice push for like the 150 area, at the very least 145, but I would say 145 to 150 within a week and a half from now. I think Nvidia is going to be going right back up there, especially as we approach earnings. We're getting lots of good buy ratings from analysts, and I think this could lead the market higher as time goes on. Tesla's looking decent. Now, there's a downtrend on Tesla. It's actually forming a giant flag right here. So it's technically on a downtrend, right? But for the short term, it might try to bounce because of this inverse head and shoulders. There's like a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder. So typically this leads to, a small dip and eventually a break. If we break 362, we're looking for an attempt to push up for 375. If we lose 345, we could be dipping right back down towards the 330s. So I think there might be a dip and a bounce. Break 360, we're looking for a bigger breakout. I think we still look more bullish. A dip and a bounce is very probable when there is still some upside off this inverse head and shoulders. For Apple, we're looking bullish because we have an inverse head and shoulders here, a triple bottom structure, and we have this imbalance to fill. I wouldn't be surprised if Apple gets a small pullback, retests 240 before it bounces, and goes for 248 to 250 as the most likely possibility. Please keep that in mind. For Netflix, we look bullish as long as we don't end up losing 1,032. I think we're likely going to continue this uptrend and try to push back up towards much higher levels, such as like 1,080. So I think there's a good chance we continue this uptrend and we start to continue this push very, very nicely. For MSTR, we're looking more bullish, especially as we're breaking this resistance. As long as we're above 337, we're looking for an attempt for the 340s. If we end up losing 334, we're looking for a dip. So I think that there's a very, very good chance that this is like a slanted inverse head and shoulders, and we try to push higher from here. I wouldn't be surprised if we make a move like this, especially as this wick is formed. So we could be looking for a push into the 340s at least from here. For Celsius, Celsius is stuck in the middle right here. If we break past 23, we're looking for an attempt to push back up towards 23.8 or above. If we lose 21.8, we're looking for a dip. I anticipate that's not officially looking for a strong breakout here. Might retest 21.8 before it attempts to bounce, but I just think it's in a range. And I think that there's going to be a little bit more downside coming to the 21.8 area first before we see a bounce. So just keep that in mind. For Supermicro, we're looking bullish, especially after some good news has come out. I think that we're hitting this liquidity zone right here around the 50 area. So I think that we might dip and go a little higher for like the low 50s, and then we'll see how it ends up reacting to that. I'm still anticipating there's more room for this to continue to go. Palantir is looking bullish. We're making higher highs and higher lows for now, but don't forget that when you zoom out, when you go to like the daily chart, eventually this will turn and come back down to fill this gap. So yes, we're bullish. I do think we're very, very bullish, but we do have this gap down here to fill. There's a lot of them. And eventually this will end up turning back down. So I would be very careful about buying up here. Not financial advice when I say that. I think it's going to continue this uptrend for now. For now, it may continue an uptrend like this, hit the low 130s before we see this thing pivot back down. I think it might slowly start pushing for 125 or so before it eventually turns. But just be careful with this. It could go a little higher before it turns back down. Rivian's looking bullish as we're trying to break structure here. We also have an inverse head and shoulders. This is a good sign. We have earnings very soon. I believe we have earnings as soon as this week. Let me just double check. So on Thursday, we have Rivian's earnings, which could be affecting the share price. There's an inverse head and shoulders that looks a bit more bullish. It might dip and start pushing for like the 14.5 plus area, so keep that in mind. For SoFi, we're looking bullish. We could dip back down to like the 15.75 area before it just starts to bounce and break out for the 16.5s. So keep that in mind. There's going to be likely an attempt for this to try to bounce. For AMD, we're looking more bullish. If we break past 113, we're looking for an attempt to push up to where this resistance is. As long as you don't lose 111, I think we favor a little bit of a push, especially with Nvidia. So it might retest this white trend line, dip like this and start pushing for like the 114s. And we'll see if you reject or not off that. So look for a little bit more upside. ARM is kind of stuck in between these levels. If we manage to break 160, we're looking for a push. If we reject, we're looking for a dip back down towards 156. We're rejecting here, so if we make a lower high, we could continue to fall towards 156. So we'll give this some time. It does look a bit more bearish to me. On Coinbase, we might dip a little bit more towards like 268 before it tries to bounce. Still looks kind of weak, so look for a little bit more downside, especially after earnings came out. So watch that very closely. Amazon has a distributive structure, which typically suggests that we could be dipping to like 225 to 227 before we see some buyers defend. For Meta, we're on a bit of an uptrend, making higher highs and higher lows. We could be pushing for essentially 740 plus. Unless we lose 724, we're favoring upside for 740. Microsoft is a little bit weaker. We're looking for 405 to be retested. We'll see if we bounce off that or not. Google is stuck in between. We have a nice like inverse head and shoulders like structure. If we manage to break past 189, we're looking for a push for 191. So we'll see how that goes as well. GameStop might retest 26 before it tries to bounce. And AMC may also break higher, especially as we're making higher lows. So we could continue to uptrend for essentially 3.7. For others out there, such as DJT, we are continuing to hold up. We're kind of shopping between these levels. Might retest 29.8 before we see a bounce. The VIX is technically on a downtrend, which tends to be bullish for the markets. Might bounce a bit before it continues to fall. The market may dip just a little bit before it tries to break out even higher. I still see some more upside potential. The 10-year is dipping, and so is the dollar, which tends to be bullish for the markets. The dollar might bounce a little bit, though, when you look at the 4-hour. Despite the downtrend it's on, might see a small push before it dips lower as the market continues to break out. So my view is quite simple. Might be a small pullback coming before the market bounces and goes even higher and makes new all-time highs. That's the view I currently have. I could change my view if the technicals change, but for now, that's what we're essentially looking for. With that being said, I want to thank you all so much for listening. Have a very, very happy President's Day weekend. Enjoy the rest of the weekend and what life has to offer. I'll be back with another update tomorrow before market open. Until then, thank you for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and peace out.